All right, hello there. We are going to talk a little bit about conditional statements. And conditional statements are one of the most fundamental parts of computer programming because they are what allows a computer program to decide whether to run a segment of code or not run a segment of code. So computers can only do what we have taught them how to do, and it's up to us to also teach them how to decide what things they know how to do they should do. And we use conditional statements to do that. And the most foundational conditional statement there is an if statement. So we are going to look at the if statement and also else if statements and also else statements in 3 different languages: Python, JavaScript, and Java. And you're going to see a lot of similarities between the 3, but we can kind of compare and contrast the syntax a little bit by looking at all 3. So first, let's look at Python. We have a variable here that we're starting with, and we're just defining x to have the value of 3. Actually, let's start it out with the value of 7, in fact. And so x is a variable that has the value 7. Now, this number could have come from a lot of places. In fact, we could have user input that gets the number. We could have some other algorithm that determines the number. And perhaps what we'd want to do at some point in the program is check if this number either is something in particular or bigger than that or smaller than that. So in this program, we're checking to see if it is lucky number 7. Now, to do that, we use what is called an if statement, which you can see here on line 3. So it starts with the reserved word if. That's why it's coming up blue. If is something special in this language, so that color change is indicating that the computer recognizes it is a special thing in that programming language. And it says if, and then in parentheses we have a Boolean condition. Boolean is just a fancy word for true or false, a statement or a variable, a piece of information that either is true or it is false. So in this condition, we are putting the Boolean statement x equals 7. Now you'll notice on line 1, we have x equals 7 with 1 equal sign. A 1 equal sign operator is the assignment operator. That is assigning the value 7 to x. So line 1, the sentence says, make x have the value 7. Now on line 3, when we have 2 equal signs, that is no longer the assignment operator, that is the comparison operator. So it is comparing x and 7 and asking the question, is x equal to 7? Now, there's only 2 answers to this question. Yes, it is, or no, it is not. That is what makes it Boolean, is either a true statement or a false statement. So it's actually not saying, is x 7? It's saying x is 7, which could be true or it could be false. So in the case that it's true, we're going to print this message, x is 7. You'll notice there's a little colon, which is typical in Python, and then we tab over and we say, do this statement if and only if this condition is true. Now, there's a chance that it's not true. So in the case that it's not true, we can use this conditional statement, elif, which actually is else if. So the word else meaning otherwise. That last thing I checked is not true. So if it's not 7, check if, and in this case, x is less than 7. And again, we print a message that says x is less than 7 in that condition. Now there's a last conditional statement I have here, just else by itself. Else is saying otherwise. So if the other conditions weren't true, I know that something else might be true. So if we have already checked if x is 7 and it's not, or if x is less than 7 and it's not, then x must be more than 7. Now, what is important is when we string these statements together, only one of these lines will ever get printed. So x is either 7 or less than 7 or more than 7. It's only going to hit one of those categories. So let's try running it, and we'll test it with x equals 7. And there we go, it worked. Let's try it with a number less than 7, so we'll run with 4. Now it says x is less than 7, and let's try it with a number greater. So how about 8? And x is more than 7. Great, so it looks like it works. Now, let's take a real quick detour and look at the same setup in JavaScript and also Java. So first, in JavaScript, only a few things change. we include this reserved word var to create a variable. We still have an if statement. We still have the double equal sign for the comparison. Now, instead of a colon, we use curly braces to denote a code block. And instead of print, we use console.log. And also we include a semicolon. But otherwise, this is the same thing, and it behaves the same way. X is 7. It should print X is 7. If we give it a smaller number, it will go smaller. And then if we use a bigger number, we'll go bigger. Now, let's take a look at Java. So in Java, we have a little bit more syntax up front. We have to be inside of a class. That's just saying we're working on a program. We have to be inside of a main block. That's just the code that's getting run. And now we don't create a generic variable. We create specifically an int variable that's storing an integer. But otherwise, this line looks more or less the same as the other programs. Same thing here, an if statement with the double equal sign operator. So in pretty much every language, one equal sign is assign, two equal signs is compare. And then, of course, in Java, our print is system.out.print, or system.out.println in this case. But otherwise, it looks the same. Now, let's go back to Python just as a place to play around. Now, earlier I said that if these things are tied together, if, elif, and else, only one of these things will be executed. So we don't have to write x is less than 7. We could say, for example, x is less than 10 here. Let's just make this statement x is less than 10. And if we put the number 3 in here, for example, it's going to tell us, yes, x is less than 10. But if we put the number 7 in, which is less than 10, we don't get that message. We get x is 7. So when you have a elif or an else, it has to be tied to an original if statement. And if that if statement's condition is true, the rest of the things in that chain get ignored. Now that's important. There are some times where you want to choose one of a few options and only one of those few options. If you wanted to separate them, you can certainly do that, but you can't use an elif. We would just make this an if by itself. Well, now in this case, this if statement on line 3 and 4 is not in any way, shape, or form attached to the if statement on line 5 and 6. So if we run it again with x equals 7, it'll say x is 7. That's line 4. It'll also say true in this if statement, and we'll get x is less than 10. If we have, we should change this too, just so it's accurate. If we put a higher number up, so let's say 15, and we run it, we're only getting that x is more than 10 statement. This statement does not evaluate to true, and let's actually space these out a little bit. So the statement on 3 does not evaluate to true, so it does not run. The statement on line 6 is also false. X is not less than 10. But because we have this else statement tied to it, we still hit this other message, x is more than 10. You will see if statements, if else statements, if else statements, in long chains and short chains by themselves. There's lots of very different combinations that you can put them together. But at the very base level, the important things to know is that there is some kind of statement which is true or false. And the if statement looks at it and says, if that condition is true, execute this code. And if it is not true, then we can get into dealing with else's. All right, I hope that helps clear up the basics of if and else statements, and again, across these 3 different languages. Bye now.